Welcome to our second online wine tasting, where we're going to be tasting through the wines of Italy. My name is Mark Faber. I'm the head wine buyer for United Cellars. And my colleague for this evening, who'll be showing us through some of these wines, is Alastair Cooper.
Hello, everyone.
Alastair is a Master of Wine based in the UK, based in Henley, just outside of London. And Ali and I have played an instrumental part in choosing the vast majority of these wines to come to New Zealand. And we wanted to kind of give you a few of the backstories of these wines and a bit of the history of the regions, and just give you a bit of an understanding as to why we thought these wines were kind of the best ones to bring in. And hopefully it's a good reason for you guys to crack a few nice bottles and join us for a drink. So if everyone is ready to go, hopefully you've got your first glass ready to go. I know Te Rangi sent you through a placemat with 3 glasses. If you can have all 3 poured, that'd be amazing. But if you don't have enough glassware for that, that's totally fine. Just pour the first glass, which is the Prosecco, the Cescon Prosecco. And
then
we'll get cracking.
Just say a couple of words, if that's all right, Mark. I think, and Mark's probably about to say this, but we want this to be as interactive as possible. So if you guys have any questions throughout about the wines, about really anything to do with wine that you want to know, then please do ask. Apologise, it's 8 a.m. here, and my video isn't brilliant because they're drilling up the road in front of my house. So I've had to go into an alternative room that we're decorating at the moment. So the lighting isn't great, so I'm sorry for that. It's been quite the morning, so I'm looking forward to a glass of wine, even though it's 8 a.m. So hopefully we'll have, it's a little bit early, but we'll have some fun. So yeah, please do ask any questions. I think we've got a nice small group. So just, if you want to just do the old school, stick your hand up, then do. We'll ask your feedback on the wines as well, because that's always fun.
Absolutely. So the probably the best option is, if you'd like, I've given everyone the ability within this tasting, because as Ali just said, we do have quite a small group here. You can take yourself off mute. All you need to do is hover down on your page to the bottom left, and you can press the unmute button. Feel free to do that at any time, and you can ask us a question whenever you want. The other option is you can chat us. So in the center of the screen, as you hover down across the middle of the page, you'll see a box that says chat, and you can just literally chat, as Joe just chatted to me before about someone whose daughter drank their wines. You can just chat everyone, and I'll make sure I keep an eye on the chats for the whole group, and we can feel free to ask us. If you don't want to unmute yourself, just chat us a question. It's totally fine. So and without further ado, let's get kicked off. Let's get started. So first thing we want to look at, obviously, is going to be is the topic that we're covering tonight, which is Italy. So Ali, your thoughts on Italian wine in less than 2 minutes?
My thoughts on Italian wine in less than 2 minutes. That's probably the hardest question anyone could ever ask me to do. So Italy, undoubtedly one of the greatest wine producing countries in the world, and between Italy and France, they're always the top 2 producers by volume. A bit like France in many ways, in that they can produce, when they put their mind to it, the greatest wines of Italy are some of the greatest in the world. When they don't, they can be pretty standard bog fare, but that's the way it goes. It's probably the most complex country that I can think of. When I was first learning about wine, Italy was a complete enigma, because, and we'll talk about this throughout the evening, but they have so many indigenous grape varieties and so many different styles. They call the same grape variety different things in different villages. So it is hugely, hugely complex, but it's incredibly varied. So we're going to have a little journey from the north to the south today, but up in the north, you've got the Alpine influence. So that's hugely important. And one of the key things with Italy is that it's surrounded obviously by water. So there's a huge influence of the coast as well. And it is, as I say, we're just sort of touching the sides really today with 3 wines. And it is something that you could probably spend months on trying to sort of capture each of the individual styles that you find within Italy. So we just got 3 fun wines tonight that capture just little areas. But if you want to ask anything about other regions that we're not covering, please do.
Thanks, mate. So just to go back to the map, so to tell you exactly where we're going this evening. So we're going to be starting in the north with Prosecco, which is just from this area up here in the Veneto. Then we're going to be going to Abruzzo, which is this green section here in the middle. And then we're finishing with Nero d'Avola from Sicilia, which is down in the South Sicily. So we're kind of splitting it very, very, very simply, and almost too simply, into kind of north, central, and south, which as Ali touched on, you've got the northern Alpine section, you've got the central section, which is influenced heavily by the coast, and then the south, which is the warmest, of course, the closest to the equator, so the warmest and sunniest, but also a very strong volcanic influence in the island of Sicily. So just a basic history on Italy. Italy's basically, as Ali's touched on a lot of this already, but unlike Spain and France, the grape can be found, as you saw in that previous image, pretty much everywhere. It's only the central spine and the very, very, very north of Italy, where it's too mountainous to grow grapes, that you don't find vines in Italy. You see them by the side of the road, you see them in between fields, people have them in their backyards. Everywhere you go, wine is, as I've said here, wine is not a privilege, it is a right. It is the trinity of the Italian wine. The trinity of the Italian diet is bread, olives, and wine. And so many meals take those three things into account when they're cooking. So
and salami and cheese and
all
the wonderful things that we all love.
So wine and grapes and wine, I should say, in the reverse, have been grown and made in Italy for literally millennia. It has been thousands and thousands of years. What we know as the wine industry today in Italy, in some sections, is very similar to what it may have been thousands of years ago, but in the vast majority, it has changed quite a lot. There's been a lot of influx of newer grape varieties that were more reliable, and the dying out of ancient varieties. And as Ali said before, I mean, sometimes you get two grapes that are the same thing that are called different things, and they evolve in different ways. So I must agree with you, Ali. When I first started studying Italy as a country, it definitely is one of the hardest places to get your head around, because there's no real cheat sheet. It's not like you go to one area. I mean, there are certain areas where, for example, Tuscany, where the reds are usually Sangiovese, but that's very much in the minority. The rest of it's kind of a multitude of grapes grown in a multitude of ways. So,
but then even within that, you've got the Tuscans. You go from one village to the next, and they've got a different clone or a slight mutation of the grape that has a different name, and it is hugely complex. And the only way, it's like every country in the world, the only way to really truly understand a country or a region is to go there. That's where you really begin to feel what's happening in the vineyard and understand the aspects, the climate, the soil. So it's a great excuse to get yourselves out to Italy when we're all allowed to travel again.
Yes, please.
We've just seen a question come in.
Great question here from Tammy. So Tammy said, well, what is amphore? So I've touched on here, and thank you for reading it, that basically a lot of the original traditional viticulture, a lot of which is still used today, was created in Italy. It was by millennia ago by the Italian people. So, creating trellis systems to hold up the vines off the ground to make it easier to harvest and less able to be infected by molds and funguses. And also amphorae. So amphorae are clay vessels that traditionally they would use. So this was before we would use wooden barrels to mature things. They would use clay pots, which are known as amphorae, to mature, not necessarily to mature wine. It was basically just to carry the wine, because the amphorae would have no real impact on the taste of the wine itself. It was just usually they would have a clay amphorae with a piece of a wax seal on the top to make sure it didn't oxidize. So before they ever knew what bacterial spoilage was, they knew that you had to put a top on wine. So that they knew how to avoid bacterial spoilage without even knowing what bacterial spoilage was. So it was quite amazing. But an amphorae was, sometimes they were buried in the ground. to keep them more, to keep oxygen levels to an absolute minimum, to keep the wine fresher for longer, to let it mature. So so that's what an amphora is. I hope that answers your question sufficiently, Tammy.
But they've actually, it's important probably to say as well, they've made a real comeback, haven't they, Mark? In the last sort of 10, 15, 20 years, they've become quite the trendy fermenting vessel all over the world. So all the cool guys making what they call orange wine now, which is a whole new subject, which is essentially a white wine made like a red wine, are now fermenting in these amphora, trying to go back to the original techniques. It's something that happens a lot in the country of Georgia as well, and in countries even such as Chile, they used to use what they call amphora called tinajas down in the south of Chile. They're all making a comeback. So like everything, it's cyclical, and they're quite the trendy vessel now for winemakers.
I'm sure it also helps that the cost of French oak barrels are getting higher every year. So
I think that's probably something to do with it as well. Yeah.
But great point here from Liz, who said that Heron's Flight and Matacana use amphora for their top Sangiovese. Thank you for that, Liz. I know in the Australian wine industry, there's a producer called Giant Steps that uses amphora, that uses large clay amphora. In Australia, we had only one amphora producer in all of Australia, and they actually shut down last year. So if anyone was looking for a new job, clay amphora producer could be a growth market. Surely
some of those cool kids in Adelaide Hills and around there must be using amphora, I'm sure.
Without doubt. There's a few guys in McLaren Vale as well. Yeah, definitely. But let's move on to our first wine, and hopefully you guys are all enjoying a nice cold glass of this now. And Ali, I might throw over to you for Prosecco, just the basics on Prosecco, if you would, mate.
Yeah, sure. Do we want to go on to the next slide? Is that where we talk about production? So it's Prosecco. Right, let's have a look here what we got. So we are in the region of the Veneto. So right here in the northeast of Italy. And I think it's probably fair to say that this is what I would call the factory of Italian wine. So here in this region alone, we have three of the most prolific wines made in Italy. So we've got Prosecco, we've got Soave, and we've got Valpolicella, all made in this region here near Venice. Prosecco is an interesting one. Again, this is where the typical Italian making it complicated. So Prosecco used to be the name of the grape used to make this sparkling wine. And then they wanted to protect the area, much as Champagne have done in France. They wanted to protect the name Prosecco. So they actually changed the name of the grape from Prosecco to Glera. So this is now made from the Glera grape to stop people using the term Prosecco. Prosecco has been a complete phenomenon globally, especially in the UK in the past, since 2008, I would say, since the global crash.
Yeah, definitely.
It's how big is it in New Zealand?
So probably, have we got Tirangi? Has he got is he able to say something? Here we go. We've got our New Zealand office in there. What do you think, guys?
Yeah, we'd say probably over the last 5-10 years, it's really boomed, get bigger and bigger. More people are asking for it. More people are asking about it. More people are kind of wanting different variations as opposed to maybe one that they've just tried once or something like that. So I'd say there's a lot more opportunity for Prosecco, people who are making out there. I think it would be a big hit over here by far because of the price point as well.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, there's still quite a lot of people with misgivings that it's it's nasty and too sweet. It's not necessarily. This one isn't.
Yeah.
But what are your thoughts on Prosecco is meant to be dry, or a lot of people think it's too sweet?
Yeah. It's an interesting point actually you guys bring up there, because actually historically Prosecco was all the Prosecco that was drunk in the region, about 80% of it was quite sweet. And we'll talk about the complicated nature of labels and sweetness in Prosecco in just a second. So historically it was sweet, but due to international demand, so we all, mainly as sort of Western customers, we will want to drink something a little bit drier. So the producers have changed hugely now, and a lot of the wine styles, the Proseccos that they're now making are drier to suit that international palate. The thing with Prosecco is it does have a bit of a reputation as being cheap, but it's become an affordable luxury. And as we go back to this 2008, which was the big year where it really made a hit, people wanted to have fun, and bubbles are seen as fun, something you can treat yourself to at home. And that was where the boom really took off. In the UK, we consume about a quarter or a third of all of the Prosecco produced, which is about 800 million bottles a year. And I think we consume probably around a third. So it's huge here in the UK. That's everyone goes out and drinks Prosecco on a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Monday night. So it's been a phenomenon. But and it does mean that actually, when the demand goes up like that, quality has actually gone up. Often in the past with Italy, when demand goes up, actually the quality goes down. But here we've seen a real drive to quality in the past 10, 15 years with Prosecco. So should we move on to the next slide, and then we can look at how Prosecco is made? So what's the difference between Champagne and Prosecco? Well, first of all, the key thing is that Prosecco is a lot cheaper to make. And that's because, without going too deeply in it, Champagne has a secondary fermentation in bottle. And to make good Champagne, the whole process takes 3 to 4 years, from picking the grapes to actually releasing the wine. Therefore, it's you've got all your storage issues. It's an expensive way of producing wine. So Prosecco is made in a far cheaper, more effective way. So we've got the base wine. They pick the grapes, pick the Glera grapes. They ferment it into a dry wine. Then they will put it into a big tank instead of into bottle. And there they will put sugar and yeast. That's in our first tank here that you see. And then it undergoes the second fermentation in a big tank, which takes 10 days. Then under pressure, they will filter the wine, add a bit of sugar and bottle it, and it's ready to go to market very, very quickly. Prosecco is all about the freshness of fruit. And it's a wine style that normally shouldn't be aged, really. It's about keeping that freshness. So they will keep a lot of the wines before they release them, they'll keep them in these tanks at very cold temperature to bottle them when the market is ready. Champagne is completely the opposite. It's all about age. Age is what gives it its beauty, those lovely toasty, brioche, nutty flavors we get from Champagne. In Prosecco, it's all about that peachy freshness of fruit, and it's easy and easy to appreciate, easy to drink, and not complicated. And I'm not doing it a disservice. It can be great. It can also be great with a bit of Campari thrown in it, but that's my... What's the base wine? Okay, so the base wine, we've got a question from Tabby. The base wine is essentially, you will pick the grapes and you will ferment it dry, and that is your base wine. So you've got a pretty acidic wine, which then you add your sugar and yeast to. That will start a second fermentation in that base wine. So it's really just the first step of making it. So which I couldn't actually source exactly the same wine as you guys have got here.
We meant the variety. Is it a different variety in the base wine each time, or does it matter? Or
No, it's always the same variety, and the variety that is used is called Glera. As I said earlier on, it used to be called Prosecco, but they changed the name from Prosecco to Glera. So it's a fairly, dare I say it, uninteresting grape variety. It's all about that freshness of fruit. You don't find much still Glera made. It's pretty much only made into Prosecco. So the grape is Glera.
So one of the reasons why we thought that, and I must point out, in the defense of these guys, Cescon, who are one of my absolute favorite Italian producers, is the fact that the Cescon Prosecco that they make specifically for us is definitely far from the bog standard cheap, just fizzy crud that you find a lot of places. And that is really where that's kind of like the supermarket, very, very, very cheap style stuff. These guys are 100% organic, or in conversion to organic. They're completing conversion to organic in this year, so which is very, very, very rare. in Italy, but especially in this area. It was voted Michael Cooper's top import for 2019 last year. So and for a Prosecco to do that up against all other imports is absolutely mind-bending, to be honest. But it's a very, very reliable wine, and we know there are so many customers that they try it for the first time and think, oh, this is a little bit more expensive than the Prosecco that we usually get, but it just delivers. It over-delivers. So we absolutely love it. And then, sorry, mate.
What does it say on the label? Is it Brut, or is it extra dry, or is it dry?
So I believe it's Brut. The one that we are tasting now is Brut.
Okay, because I couldn't source exactly the same wine, and that's an interesting point, isn't it? So if you look in the bottom right-hand corner of this slide that we've got on, again in typical complex Italian fashion, Brut is the driest, from 0 to 12 grams per litre of residual sugar. And then following that, sweeter is the extra dry, from 12 to 17 grams per litre. So this one's extra dry, is it?
Oh, sorry, extra dry, sorry.
And then you have your dry at 17 to 32 grams per litre. So again, it's slightly counterintuitive. It doesn't really make sense why extra dry is drier than Brut, but it is.
As I say, why dry is quite sweet.
and why dry is actually really very sweet. So again, it's important to know that. And you'll also find on the label somewhere, it should say either frizzante or spumante. So when you're looking at Proseccos, frizzante means lightly fizzy, and spumante is sort of fully fizzy, dare I say. And it's all to do with the amount of pressure that they put the wine under when they're filtering it and when they're doing the second fermentation. So some slight quirky Italianisms there with labeling that it's probably worth knowing. But you're right, and I think Cescon, we've been working with them for years, haven't we? And they've always been solid. And I think it is important. One of the big differences with Champagne and Prosecco is that Champagne is very, very brand led. So you'll all know your Veuve Clicquot, your Moet, your Lanson, your Paul Roger. It's all about brands, and people are very loyal to their brands. With Prosecco, there's been a lot of price discounting, and it is really, Prosecco has become the brand. There's very little brand loyalty, certainly in the UK, when it comes to Prosecco. But when you do find a good one, and I think the Cescon, as you say, is good, and the fact that it is organic, and they spent a lot of time converting that. It's not the easiest place in the world to be organic there, because there's a lot of rain. So it means that they are paying a lot of attention in the vineyard. Then it is worth looking, keeping that brand in mind.
Okay, thanks, Ali. So we might move on to our next wine now, because I've just noticed we're 25 minutes in. So we're going to move down to the southeast. I'm just going to go to the map quickly. So as I said before, this green area here is Abruzzo. So it's on the west coast of Italy, facing Croatia, basically. And the capital city there is Pescara. And this is a small producer we started working with very recently, and actually Ali introduced us to this producer, to Valori, to Valori and the owning company, which is Masciarelli. So this is just a little map of Abruzzo. If you can give us a quick rundown of Abruzzo, please, mate.
Yeah, I will. So Abruzzo is again another sort of enigmatic region. So I was lucky enough to go with Mark last year, and then I went again about 6 weeks later. I was invited back over there, and it's a fascinating area. So if you go, actually, can we go back to the main Italy map, Mark? Does that work? There we go. So if you look where we've got Rome here, if you point Rome out, essentially, you've got between Rome and Abruzzo are the Apennine Mountains. So we landed in Rome, we flew in from Germany, we jumped in the car and we drove for about 2 hours to get across to Abruzzo. And you go through the most stunning landscape. And I think it's fair to say, even with Italians, and I've asked a lot of my Italian friends, you talk to them about Abruzzo, and it's a bit of an unknown region in many ways. But quite why, I don't know, because I was blown away by how beautiful it is. So as you drive from Rome across to Abruzzo, you go through the mountains, And there you have the National Park of Abruzzo, where you have the Gran Sasso Glacier, which is up to 3,000 meters high, where you can ski within an hour and a half of Rome. They have a beautiful national park there with brown bears, with big brown bears. Can't remember what they're called, but there's about 50 of them left in the world. We've got golden eagles. You've got amazing truffles there. It's the center of saffron production in Italy. And then as you sweep down, so you've got these huge, the influence of the mountains. And then as you sweep down towards the coast of Pescara, you have the coastal influence there as well. So it's a hugely diverse region with the mountainous area sweeping down to the Adriatic coast, which means...
So this map here shows it a little bit more clearly. So you can see here, the section that I'm pointing at here is the mountainous area. And then you've got this black line, which is where things drop. It's like almost like a sudden drop down to the base there. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, absolutely. And that what that means, as I was saying, from a wine production point of view, is that there are many different influences to be played with. So the further you get to the coast, you have the cooling influence of the coast. And then the further you go inland, you have without going too deep into it, the effect of altitude and how that can affect the ripening of the grapes with warm days and cool nights. So there's a lot of things for them to play with in this region. It's about 100 kilometers north to south, I believe. And this particular one is from up here in the Teramo, in the very northern bit, as you can see right in the north, by the coast, which is where this wine comes from. So here in this region, there's 3 great varieties that are king. In red, it's Montepulciano. And again, this is where it becomes complicated in Italy, because in Abruzzo, Montepulciano is a grape variety. If you go into Tuscany, there is a place called Montepulciano where the wine is actually made from Sangiovese. So this is the grape Montepulciano from Abruzzo. And the other white grape varieties are Trebbiano and Pecorino. And I believe, we have a fantastic Pecorino that you must look out for. I hope we've got that in New Zealand. I'm sure we must do. Do we have that in the books?
No, it's not yet in New Zealand. It's just in Australia for now.
Oh, well, that's a teaser for you. We'll make sure we get it over to New Zealand because it's a beautiful wine. So Montepulciano is I think it's a great variety. If we're going to liken it to anything else, I hope you've all poured it into your glass. I would liken it to Syrah, perhaps. I'm going to pour myself a bit of a glass here. So I opened this last night just to let it breathe and have a glass with my pasta last night, and I want to see how it's evolved. So the flavors of Montepulciano, it all depends. If we go back to the map very quickly, Mark, the in-depth map, if it's planted on the very fertile areas, it doesn't do so well. But up here in Teramo in the north, which is where we're looking at, the soil is a lot poorer, which means the vines have to work a lot harder. And there's a huge amount of influence from the coast and these rolling hills. And this is undoubtedly where the greatest Montepulcianos come from. It can be a very brambly, smoky, forest fruity style of a grape. It can be a little bit reductive. It needs air while it's being produced. The producers need to be very careful it doesn't develop some of these stinky characteristics. It's got a reputation as a workhorse grape variety, but it can be so much more. So the key person in changing the fortunes of Montepulciano was a man called Gianni Masciarelli, who we went to see. Well, we didn't see him because he passed away a couple of years ago, but we went to see Masciarelli, the producer, who are nearer Pescara and Chieti. But they work very closely with Luigi Valori, which is the wine that we're drinking now. And Luigi is one of the loveliest guys you'll meet. He used to be a professional football player till he knackered his leg. I think he played for, it wasn't Juventus, but he played for a Serie A team. Doesn't speak a word of English, but is a lovely, lovely man. So he's producing these wines organically and has been making them for 26 years. And the difference between a lot of Montepulciano and this is the fineness of tannins. I tasted this last night and found it really taut and lean. And the tannins are certainly marked here with great levels of acidity. And Montepulciano is not just a workhorse grape variety, and people are now beginning to see that it can be a very classy grape variety. Have you got the wine with you, Mark, or not?
I do not. No, I'm not allowed to have wines at home at the moment with Dry July, but
so
no, I'm only joking.
Any thought?
Yeah, I just want to say in terms of like in the office here, I mean, we think in terms of its complexity and richness, it's a lot bigger than personally what I feel it's quite big for a Monty, if I'm honest. I think it's quite good that it is that way, but I wondered whether that's traditional or whether that's, I mean, you kind of touched on it then, but I wondered whether, do you reckon that's a more appealing factor to it?
I think, yeah, I would say this isn't the more traditional. The more traditional Montepulciano will be really soft, robustly fruity, and probably slightly lower acidity.
Simpler, I would say, yeah.
Yeah, less acidity and less tannin. But what I find on this wine is the tannins are there, but they're very, very fine and elegant tannins. And I think, quality. I think this in the UK is £12. I don't know. You guys will know how much we're selling it for in New Zealand. I should know, but I don't. But it's exceptionally good value for money, and just a snapshot of how good Montepulciano can be. In Italy, it's known as the wine of the pizzerias. So it's kind of, people drink Montepulciano from Abruzzo as a everyday drinking wine. But in Teramo, and that is, as I say earlier on, it is very much a factor of where it comes from. This is the greatest area for producing Montepulciano up in the north. So more acidity, more tannin, but still that lovely, robust, dark fruit character. And actually, another important thing, very, very briefly, is up there you do get a longer growing season because of the cooling influence of the coast. So this is a late ripening grape variety. So up there, it gets to full ripeness, but also with that retention of acidity.
So just to give everyone the heads up here, it's very, very similar, Ali. If you're selling for £12, it's $24.99 for us in New Zealand. So.
Is it okay? Well, I think I'm really pleased that we can that we found this wine. As I say, he's farming, and actually another factor we haven't talked about is you'll see on the label it does say bio or bio. So this is a completely organic wine, and Luigi is very, very passionate about his organics. You get him on the subject of organics, and he doesn't really stop.
It's a long lunch with lots of wine, that's for sure.
We had a very, very long lunch with lots of wine, and he is insanely passionate about his vines. They're like his little babies, and he really believes in biodiversity. I think we'll all agree monocultures are never good. So he's very into his bees. He's actively trying to promote biodiversity in his vineyard. And often, if you look at these vineyards that are produced organically, they don't look so beautiful because they're not beautifully manicured. But I think that's a really important part of the holistic sort of entirety of a vineyard to have biodiversity.
Yeah.
What do you guys think? Any thoughts about this wine? We've got some cheers.
Seems to be a few empty glasses, which is usually a good sign.
Good. Hello, Alistair. Just similarly like what you said with like Prosecco, like how the fashion within England happened like quite a bit before New Zealand. Do you think in the same fashion, like my mum back home in England, all she drinks is she drinks a lot of Montepulciano. Do you think that same sort of trend will happen again here in New Zealand, like corresponding to
that? Possibly. I think the big difference between the UK and New Zealand is that we do produce wines here, some great sparkling wines, but we're not really a wine producing country. Therefore, I think there's always going to be an element of maybe a bit more parochialism in perhaps New Zealand and Australia. When you produce your own wines, you tend to probably drink those more regularly than other wines. But I think certainly in Australia, there's been, people are very, very interested in Italian wines, and there's been a huge growth, I think, over the past 10 years in Australia with importing and drinking Australian wines, but also planting Italian grape varieties in Australia. I think it's probably might be a little bit slower in New Zealand, and of course the population isn't quite so big. So over here, when you don't produce wines, we import so much. So I think it could happen. I think I imagine in New Zealand that Italian wines are growing in popularity, but we might not see things like Montepulciano sort of storm the market. It probably won't happen.
Also, there's potentially a slightly different climate as well in New Zealand, but for that. But look, I mean, this ties in quite well to a question that Mike's raised here, which is we could do an hour on this question alone, Mike. I'll be honest, but I'll try and cover off as much as I can here. So, Mike said that in your own view, and I definitely agree with this view. This is a comment that's been made to me, and I'm sure to Ali as well, many times. That it's getting harder and harder to pick what country a wine comes from. Now, from my own perspective, I'm currently, and Ali could also put in his own 2 cents here as well. I'm studying the Master of Wine program, and the final exam is 36 wines done blind, and you've got to say where every wine comes from. So knowing where a wine comes from is a very, very important part of that study. So, and honestly, it has become harder and harder and harder. In fact, we did a test not last year, the year before, and there was a New Zealand Syrah in there that I think it was more than 80% of Master of Wine candidates around the world picked it as a Rhone Valley Syrah. So it was it was an incredibly impressive wine, first of all, but also it just goes to show that with that flying winemaker concept, I know in Australia we've got a lot more warmth and depth and power to a lot of our Shiraz wines, but more and more as we get into more as a kind of Grenache Shiraz, Mourvèdre blends to that Châteauneuf-du-Pape style, the lines are blurring there definitely. Hawke's Bay Syrah is just going to a new level, honestly, and is really, there are a lot of people that are flying over to the Rhone to learn what they do over there. We have some areas here in Australia. So one of our most famous producers in Canberra is Clonakilla. If any of you guys have heard of Clonakilla, they do a Shiraz Viognier, and that's literally because the winemaker studied in Côte-Rôtie in the Northern Rhone and was obsessed with it and decided to grow it in Australia. And that really is Australia's version of Côte-Rôtie. So first of all, I completely agree with you. And I agree, it's not a criticism at all. The lines are most distinctively, they're becoming less and less distinct between regions. I think also one thing is there is definitely the impact of a warming climate. So in Burgundy, for example, and in Champagne, there's no denying that the climate there is becoming, the concentration is getting easier and easier to achieve. In Germany, in German Riesling is also going through a similar kind of phase. So that's also blurring the lines between old world and new world. So yeah, it's. I mean, Ali and I were talking about Bordeaux, the 2019 Bordeaux, which the En Primeur program that we're running currently, and I was looking at some of the alcohol percentages in those wines, and the vast majority of them are 14.5% to 15%, and these are absolute top fine wines, and they're just reaching that level of ripeness without any problem. So it's very, very interesting.
It's very difficult, you're right, to pick these things now. I think, but interesting, Mike, at the end of your question, you sort of said, yet, and a generalization, Italian wines are still distinctly Italian. And you're absolutely right, because I think there is, and this is huge generalizations, but with the red grape varieties, mainly in Italy, certainly from Abruzzo up to the north, they are quite bitter. There's very much a dark cherry bitterness to Sangiovese. It can be to Nebbiolo as well. It can be Valpolicella. There is a sort of dark fruited bitterness to a lot of the red wines, and a lot of the white wines as well, be it Cortese, be it Verdicchio, be it Pecorino. They have a slight herbal, pear-like character. So there is and I can't actually answer why that is. It's just a lot of their grape varieties seem to tend towards this, in the bitter style in red, and that sort of herbaceous green fruit with white. So it's probably quite a hard question to answer, but there is a distinct Italianness to a lot of these grape varieties.
Okay, so just a quick feedback as well. So there are a few. So Montepulciano is actually a really, really good question from Tammy, saying, do the Italians blend Montepulciano with anything else?
Yeah,
I'm sure they do.
Sangiovese a little bit.
Yeah.
So you're allowed to, in the Teramo where we're from here, you're allowed to use up to 15% Sangiovese. However, I don't think that many of them do, to be perfectly honest, but there is a bit of Sangiovese around there. And people do think that Montepulciano did actually originally come from Tuscany. So I think that there is a bit there. And it will be blended with other things, because the Italians, they probably won't tell you about it, but they will be doing it and maybe selling it as something else. But it tends to be on its own, but Sangiovese, I think, is the obvious blending partner, unless you can think of any others, Mark?
No, not off the top of my head. I mean, pretty much the safe answer is Sangiovese, obviously, because pretty much everyone blends everything with Sangiovese in Italy. So
that is true. And actually, Montepulciano, and much like the next wine that we're going to look at, a lot of Montepulciano has been sold, and the Italians do this a lot, has been secretly bought in the past by producers from Tuscany and other regions, and secretly blended away because it was cheaper, has nice dark fruit, dark colour, and secretly sort of blended away into Sangiovese and other things. So often you won't be told about it, but it will be hidden amongst them.
Kept on the hush.
Yeah.
So several empty glasses there now. So we're going to move on to our third, last but not least, wine. One of my absolute favourite wines, honestly. This is my kind of Tuesday evening special. This is beautiful. So Borgo Soline it's a Nero d'Avola, and it's from Sicily. And I've got I had to write this little comment in here, this last sentence here. Fantastic food wine, and it's just absolutely perfect with pizza. This Nero d'Avola with tomato base dishes, so pasta and pizza especially, is just absolutely delicious.
You're absolutely right.
Bonini was was named in the top 5 best winemakers in the world by Decanter magazine a few years ago. So he's a very, very well known and very successful producer, a great man too. And we are I'm just going to give a little map of Sicily here. I'm going to hand over to Ali to talk a bit about Sicily.
Yeah, just a few words about Sicily. Again, very Italian sort of story with Sicily. So Sicily, traditionally the south of Italy has historically and is a fairly poor area. We've got your Ferraris and posh suits come from Milan in the north, and the further south you get, essentially it tends to get a little bit poorer. So Sicily is the largest island in the Mediterranean, and it also produces there's 112,000 hectares of vines in Sicily. So everywhere you go in Sicily, you will find vines. That's probably more vines than the whole of Australia, I should imagine, isn't it?
It's pretty close. That's pretty close.
Probably about the same. So all on this island, but it is a very warm island. But it's also within that, it's a very varied island. So I say it's warm. So I think the best way to think of Sicily is by going east to west or west to east. So let's start looking in the east. If you can put your, here we go. So we're going to look there around Mount Etna. So Mount Etna, you probably heard of, big volcano. This, in the last 15 or 20 years, has become one of the trendiest areas for making wine in probably in the world, I would say. 15, 20 years ago, no one really talked about the wines from Etna. Now they can be extremely expensive and extremely classy. So here you've got altitude of up to, I think, 1,200, 1,300 meters, which means, and volcanic soils, which means, of course, it's a lot cooler. And here the grapes that you find, the great grape is called Nerello Mascalese. And if I'm going to liken it to anything, it's probably like a Barolo, like a Nebbiolo from the north of Italy. And in fact, actually, 30, 40 years ago, the greatest buyers of wines from Etna, from Nerello Mascalese, were the producers of Barolo, who would come down, take that, and then secretly blend it away in their Barolo, as we were talking about earlier on. Then if we go down to the south, to where the Syracuse area around here, this is where the best Nero d'Avola wines come from, which is what we're drinking. Then we'll talk a little bit more about Nero d'Avola in a minute. So as you go into the middle of Sicily, it gets a little bit warmer. And here there's been an influx of international grape varieties. So Syrah, Merlot, as well as Nero d'Avola have found their way there. And they do very well. And as we move towards the west, here we've got Marsala. And here white grape varieties are king. And actually, historically not very good quality white grape varieties. So a grape such as Catarato in Zoglia, that you know, no reason why you would have heard of it. But here we're extremely close to Africa, and it is very, very hot. So they're growing huge quantities of not particularly interesting grape varieties a lot of the time. And then if you look down here, this little island of Pantelleria, here they produce some of the greatest sweet wines in the world based on Muscat. Really, really beautiful wines. But what we're drinking today is a Nero d'Avola, and I couldn't source exactly the same wine as you guys, but where is this one from that you've got?
It's from the centre and south. So it's sourced from sections of Syracuse, and then through sections of the centre as well.
Okay, so Nero d'Avola, and I agree with Mark, it is absolutely perfect for pizza or tomato-based dishes, and there's a really good reason for that. It's very, very hot in Sicily, as I was saying, but Nero d'Avola is a grape variety that naturally maintains its acidity. So you probably taste this wine. It has good levels of freshness and acidity, which is why it does well in these hot climates. If it didn't, then it would be too flabby and wouldn't have that acidity. And when you get good acidity, that's what goes well with tomato-based dishes. So Nero d'Avola is the 7th most planted grape variety in Italy. It's pretty much only found in Sicily and in a little bit in the southern bits of the main boot of Italy. It's got, as I say, it's got this high acidity, but what I always find is this chocolatey bramble character as well. And that's what the wine that I got one that was as similar as that I could get to the one you've got. It's very, very chocolatey. There's a sweetness to the fruit, but it's all these plummy bramble fruits. Someone I read recently called it the Malbec of Sicily. So it's sort of
good ones.
Yeah, sort of soft fruit character, but with good freshness, soft tannins. But
that high tone of acid as well, yeah.
Yeah, good acidity. And it's a really good pizza, easy drinking wine. And, you know, I don't always want to have, as Mark was saying, complex wines. You want to have wines that are just truly delicious. And I opened both these reds yesterday, last night, just to see how they were tasting. And I was really impressed with both of them. And Sicily is on the up. And, you know, thanks to Etna, the eyes of the world are now looking at Sicily. And it does mean that they've really upped the game with Nero d'Avola as well. So there's producers, and Alberto Antonini, I've met Alberto several times. He's making wine in Uruguay, in Argentina, all over Italy. And he truly is an absolute magician with what he can do. So, I very much enjoy drinking Nero d'Avola, and I think we should all drink more of it.
Completely agree. It's one of these. It's in. This was a wine that so every year our owner challenges me and the buying team to come up with one red and one white grape variety that will kind of change things up a little bit and bring a bit of interest to what we want to be offering people. And a couple of years ago, this was the red and the white was a Picpoul de Pinet. So the Picpoul de Pinet that was not quite as successful, but then this Nero d'Avola, this Bogosalin, has been one that we've imported almost more than any other Italian wine we've ever gotten. Every time it comes in, it just goes straight out. It is just so successful, and it's just so enjoyable and delicious and approachable, but still quite vibrant and fresh and youthful. So we love what they do, and we want them to keep doing it.
Yeah, it blends very well. Quite a few producers in the centre of Sicily are also blending it with Syrah, where it works very well with that. You got that real freshness. The Syrah there doesn't have the acidity that the Nero d'Avola does, so that blends quite well. So it's quite an adaptable grape variety. Yeah, I think it's beginning to grow in popularity here in the UK, and rightly so, because it's affordable and does very well. But yeah, Sicily's become really an important part of looking to the future for Italy, because historically, as I say, actually only 5 to 10% of the wines from Sicily, despite the 112,000 hectares, was actually what we call quality wine. So DOC, actually guaranteed quality wine. So it's always been just a factory of cheap wine. And again, when the rest of Italy during the late 19th century was going through these problems with phylloxera, this nasty little louse that killed all the vines, down here they didn't get it till a lot later. So people were coming down and buying the wine from there, which meant they just produced volume over quality. But again, that's changing. And the same thing happened in Abruzzo. It happens a lot in Italy, this sort of volume quality ratio. And now they're really addressing that. So yeah, I think this is a great choice to show.
Okay. Well,
any thoughts on this one?
We'd love to hear some thoughts on these wines. That's of course our last glass. We've still got a few more minutes to go. We'd love to hear if you want to chat through some questions you have, some opinions you have of the wines. What was your favourite? 3 I must say, quite different styles. Obviously, the Prosecco is going to be pretty unique on its own, but I think those 2 reds we've gone for, and as the UCNZ, the team said over there, that Montepulciano we get in is actually one of the more concentrated Montepulcianos that you're going to be able to find. But you compare that to the Borgo, to the Nero d'Avola, and it's kind of, apples and oranges there. It's you're really talking about the south, the sunny section. It's just got a lot more ripeness and richness and roundness. So perfect for a winter's evening, I must say.
Yeah, but it's great for barbecue as well. So the key things with both of those, the reds, as we talked about, is that acidity and that freshness. So and that for me, the first duty of wine should always be that it's refreshing. That's what I was told by a master of wine when I first started in wine. It should be always something that you want to go back to and have another sip of. And I think both of those reds do that because of that level of freshness and acidity that you get from these wines. And actually, the key thing again with the wines that we've chosen is they're all extremely affordable. They really are great value wines, and gives us an excuse to go back next year to look for some more good value wines, I think, when we're allowed, doesn't it, Mark?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's what we're trying to do. So thanks for your feedback, Liz. Good to hear you made it back from Italy in December. Alistair, I know you only just made it out of there as the virus hit Italy. So
yeah, I was in Venice when they shut down Carnival at the end of February, and we only just managed to escape. It was all quite surreal because it was before it all kicked off really here in the UK, the whole Corona thing. And we were just out there having a fun weekend, and suddenly Carnival got shut down, and Italy went into lockdown, and we escaped just as it kind of all kicked in. So we were lucky. But I look forward to getting back out there as well.
Yeah. And good point, Tammy. Yeah, really enjoyed traveling this week. We really had a big think when we were starting out these tasting sessions about what would people want to do when we're kind of sitting at home with a glass of wine, and we thought we'd try and make it not only informative and a little bit fun and kind of teaching you about the regions and about why we choose these wines, but also take you on a bit of a journey to these places. So because obviously we can't do it ourselves right now, so hopefully we as Ali said, we can one day hopefully actually get to know the wines from the vineyards themselves at some point. So yeah,
it's
photos of the regions next time. That's a really good point, Tammy. We can do that, absolutely.
Yeah, that is a good point.
Unrelated, is Dan in the Auckland office? Where's Dan? There he is, Mr. Pell. Say hello, Dan. Take him off mute, boys and girls.
Go on, say hello.
It's the famous Daniel.
Famous Daniel Pell.
Loves the teeth.
Said lose the t-shirt.
Lose the t-shirt. He doesn't wear a collar, that boy. Okay, awesome. Well, thank you everyone for coming. Thank you for being a part of our second tasting. We've got another one coming up on the 4th of August, so in about 4 weeks' time. And that one's going to be Alistair and myself again going through the wines of Australia. So that'll just basically be a similar concept to what we're doing here, which is basically taking a grape variety and a wine from a specific region known for that, and then doing a bit of a deep dive into that region and why that makes sense in that area and why things taste like they do. So we'll be doing that with, I believe we're doing the Clare Valley Riesling, we're doing Coonawarra Cabernet, and we're doing Barossa Valley Shiraz. So some pretty classic regions and classic grape varieties. So hopefully you can come along. You can absolutely invite friends in Australia from those regions. Of course you can. We have exactly the same wines in Australia, so we can of course send them to them, no problems whatsoever. And yeah, big ups to Alistair. Thank you, Liz. I agree. Big ups to Alistair. Thank you, mate. Thank you so much for being a part of it once more. You've been...
Thank you. Thank you guys for spending your evening listening to me. It's been fun. Great way to start the day actually here. Had a coffee and then I've had some glasses of wine, so it's a pretty good way to kick off is it Tuesday? I think it's Tuesday. I can't remember.
Tuesday night over here, Tuesday morning for you.
Tuesday morning over here, sun shining. It's all good. So yeah. Thank you all for tuning in. It's been a lot of fun, and I look forward to the next one. 9 a.m. hangover. It's okay.
No worse things.
I'm in lockdown, so I haven't got anywhere to go. So
keep drinking.
I might do. I've got enough time here. But thank you guys.
Thanks for being a part.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
See you next time.
Cheers.